Hi everyone, and welcome to this REC meeting of the Inclusive Recruitment Forum. Not the slide that's currently on your screen. Apologies for that. Delighted you could all come along and join us today. Just to check that we're coming through to you loud and clear. If one or two of you could just pop a yes into the chat box to confirm that that you can hear us, that'd be handy. Thank you, Faye and Jackie, for doing that. Little bit of last minute slide pack changing. Luckily today we're mostly chatting rather than relying on slides. Well, welcome along to this meeting of the Inclusive Recruitment Forum. I think really important, I was reflecting this morning on the 4 priorities that our chair, Sarah Thewlis, had set out for 2021 in our message to members just earlier this week as we think about the direction of travel for the industry going to 2021. I was really pleased that Sarah's chosen as one of her priorities, ensuring that the REC is really robust and on the front foot on the importance of delivering inclusion through the work we do, both for clients and candidates, but also as an industry ourselves with our own staff. So the Inclusive Recruitment Forum is a really important group for us here at the REC, and our team are really committed to making sure that it's a support and a space for exchanging good practice as we go through into next year. And you never know, at some stage with yesterday's good news, we may even manage a meeting in person. But until then, I'm delighted that we've got such a fantastic lineup today to update you on what we're doing, to share stories and experiences of our pathways through the current pandemic. And I think more important, as with all downturns in the labour market, clearly clients' needs are changing very, very quickly. But a lot of client need is also reflective of things which are important to candidates, and increasingly clients and candidates alike are looking to us as the specialists to deliver on opportunity and inclusion across the labour market. So I think it's a commercial priority for the industry, but it's also obviously the right thing to do. It's certainly, having said it's close to the top of the priority list for our chair, it's certainly close to my heart and always has been. So I'm delighted to welcome you all along today, and delighted to be joined by my colleague Ornella Niso. Ornella, you were going to start off with giving us a bit of an update on the REC's work in this space since the last time we were together.
Yeah, so hello, welcome. My name's Ornella Niso. I'm the Stakeholder Engagement Manager at the REC, and I'm also Policy, Diversity and Inclusion. So if we go to the next slide, it's just a holding slide, but yeah, there we go. So latest updates from the REC. You may have seen that this morning on our website that we have been appointed as a gateway organisation for the government Kickstarter scheme. At the end of the summer, and the scheme is a scheme by the government to tackle youth unemployment. So the scheme offers employers the chance to offer young people state-subsidised temporary work placements for up to 6 months. So under the scheme, employers can apply for a state-subsidised work placement for a young person for up to 6 months, and the government will pay the national minimum wage of 100% of the national minimum wage for each young person on that scheme. The government's also offering to pay up to £1,500 in training and support to employers who are offering the scheme. Originally, when the scheme was first announced, employers had to commit themselves to offering 30 placements. This was obviously a barrier for small businesses who are unable to offer the minimum 30 places. However, now as a gateway organisation, REC members can apply to take part in the scheme, and offer a few REC members who are unable to offer the 30 can apply via the REC to take part in the scheme. So what it means that we are a gateway organisation is that we're able to, our members who want to offer maybe 5 or 10 placements can do so, and they can do it under the umbrella of the REC. So this is excellent news for those recruiters who are interested in taking part in the scheme but were previously unable to take part in the scheme. And also it's a big win for temporary work placements, that the government's recognised the benefits of temporary work in allowing young people to, as a kind of next step to allowing young people to get a taste of the labour market. So that's the great news for today. Another good piece of news is that the REC has signed the Race at Work Charter. So the Race at Work Charter is a charter that was developed by Business and Community, who are a social enterprise. The Race at Work Charter came off the back of Ruby McGregor Smith's report on race at work. And the charter essentially, signatories of the charter have to commit themselves to 5 key principles. Those principles are based on the recommendations from Ruby McGregor Smith's report on race at work. And the 5 key principles are aimed at supporting the progression of BAME workers in the workplace. So one of the key principles is the appointment of an executive to chair and oversee the racial equality and the organisation. So our appointed executive is Mr. Neil Carberry himself. There you go, Neil. And work has already started at looking at both internally what the REC do to promote racial equality as an organisation, but also what we can do for our members. So we've also started to review our diversity and inclusion strategy looking forward. Members may have already seen some slight changes to the code of conduct. So as you're doing your renews, you may have noticed that on our principles around diversity and inclusion, we are offering a lot more guidance on how recruiters can go above and beyond the legal framework that's required of them. And in keeping with this aim of ours to improve diversity and inclusion within the recruitment space, we are also looking at our products and services in this space. So REC members may be aware that we have been going through a product review, and as part of that product review, we've been looking at what kind of products and services we can offer our members to better support them in their diversity and inclusion goals. We recognise that members are all at different stages of their diversity and inclusion roadmap, as it were. We have some new members who are just starting out in the industry, and so need that kind of core education on what's required of them and where they can go for information. We have other members who we know who are already doing great things and they want to do more, and they're seeking more guidance from us and more information. So we've got plans to support them. And then we also know that there are some members who are doing extraordinary things and really excuse me, no corona, just a cough. We know that we have some members who are also doing exceptional things, and we want to highlight and celebrate them. So our new strategy would be to do exactly that. We want to educate our members, we want to empower those that need the empowerment, and we also want to celebrate those who are doing amazing things. So we've pulled together a plan and we're reviewing it currently internally, but hopefully we should be launching that next year. And we've got some great things, not only for our members, but things that we're doing for the wider recruitment industry in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion within our industry. We know that the recruitment industry itself can also improve on becoming a more diverse and diverse and inclusive sector. So we have products and services on how employers can kind of promote that within their organisations, but we also have products and services for how recruiters can act as the key vehicle between them and end clients into pushing for more diversity in the workplace. So those are some of the things that you should be looking out for. And hopefully as well, by the end of this week, we're in a process to become level 3 disability confident champions. So as you're probably aware of the Disability Confidence Scheme, which was launched by DWP, I think in 2015, I think. It was actually launched in the REC offices back in the days when we could go into the office. It was launched there by the Secretary of State at the time. And the anniversary of Disability Confident is this month, and we're hoping to achieve level 3 by the anniversary. We've already started the progress, and I know that we've had some members ask us about how they can go along with the process and what they need to do to become disability confident. So once we reach that level 3, we will be sending out guidance as part of our celebration to help support our members who wish to enter level 1, level 2, or those who want to go through the whole journey and become level 3 disability champions. So there's a lot on the agenda. There's a lot on the agenda at the moment as we push for more diversity and inclusion within the labour market. And that's it from me really in terms of an update. There's a chat function on the side So if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please just type them in the chat function, which is actually on the other side, on the right-hand side. Thank you.
Thanks, Ornella. Thanks, Ornella, and thanks for all your leadership on this for the REC. There's a lot going on here, and I think what's really pleasing to us is the level of focus there still is on these issues in the industry during a time when we're all under real challenge. The REC's approach to this is that as an industry, there's a lot for us to do to build on the strong base we have of driving opportunity and driving growth for candidates and for clients. And just this morning, I had a very good chat with Guy Hayward, who is doing some independent work in the industry around our own performance as employers of our own staff, and the REC will be looking to support that as well going forward in terms of thinking about not only the good that we can do for candidates and for clients, but also in terms of what we're all doing. And I'm seeing it myself. Just earlier this month, we moved to a new REC governance structure. That structure is designed to meet our needs as a business first and foremost, but it is also by design more diverse and more inclusive than anything that we've had before, and we can already see the benefits of that flowing through the organisation even after just the first couple of meetings. So really core and close to our heart. Ornella, thank you for your leadership on all of that, and I know you're going to stick around and pitch in on our panel session. And absolutely delighted to welcome our panelists today. Katie Bennett is Diversity and Inclusion Director at PwC, a firm which needs no introduction. Eugenia Migliori is Principal Policy Advisor at the CBI, and someone who, along with me, was very future forward in that I was at the CBI at the time that she joined, and I seem to recall we did a proto version of the online interview, which went as proto badly as you could expect because the laptop failed and we ended up doing it on my mobile phone, but she was clearly unperturbed by it. Our final guest is Sam Olsen, who's the Chief Executive of Movement to Work, which is a major business-led organisation focused on supporting young people in their transition into stable career paths. And really important, I think any of you who've looked at this morning's labour market data know just how particularly vulnerable young people are to labour market downturns of the sort that we have. So the way we're going to run this is I'm going to keep it reasonably chatty as we roll through the discussions. We've asked each of our panelists to say a few words on their take on where we currently are and their priorities. I'll maybe ask a few questions on the back of it. But I'm also going to be led by the questions that you put forward. So if you do want to pop some questions into the chat box, I can see them in front of me here and I will pose them on your behalf as we get through the presentations. Katie, I thought we might start with you today. Clearly, PwC very much in a leadership position around a number of issues. You've been working on ethnicity pay reporting for a little while now. But there's also the challenge of, well, how do you keep this relevant in a business at a time when everything has been thrown up in the air by COVID? So how are you tackling those kind of twin challenges of the important and it being challenged by the urgent? Katie, are you ready to go?
Sorry, I think I needed to be unmuted, so I was trying to signal to you guys how to do that. I need to work on my charades for unmuting or something, I think. Maybe that's for this COVID Christmas. That's going to be the charades game of the day. I don't know. Well, thank you for having me. I'm Katie, as you said. I'm a director at PwC, and I mostly work with our clients, advising them on their inclusion and diversity strategies with a particular focus around how you use data and analytics to drive that agenda. But I also advise myself, so I work with PwC specifically on some of our reporting targets and analytics, including ethnicity pay gap reporting. So I've been asked to talk a little bit today specifically around this topic of ethnicity pay gap reporting, which, as you say, PwC has done for a few years and is an incredibly kind of hot, kind of pertinent topic in the moment that an awful lot of organizations are talking about, and I'm sure many of you have had conversations about. So I thought I'd share a little bit of the context of what I'm seeing others doing, where the challenges are, where the really exciting opportunities are, a little bit of PwC's own journey, and then maybe kind of, if I've got the time, I promise not to go on for too long. Well, how do you put this in the scene, the context of what is diversity and inclusion in 2020, in this year of pandemic and of this huge focus on race and ethnicity following the huge prominence of Black Lives Matter and the killing of George Floyd. So that's kind of what I'm going to try and do. But I guess to take a step back and just start with ethnicity pay gap reporting. Some of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with it. It is essentially the idea of extending current requirements for firms with more than 250 employees in the UK to disclose their gender pay gap report to also cover ethnicity. And essentially, it's talking about some sort of disclosure that looks at the difference between the average pay of one group and the average pay of another group. And what we've typically seen companies in the UK do, what PwC has done, is to publish the gap between those who fit into ethnicity categories defined by the government as Black, Asian, minority ethnic, and those who do not. There are a lot of debates on whether that's the right approach and what's the appropriate way to do that, but I'm sort of going to move past that in the interest of time. And from a kind of a government market perspective, the government consulted on making this a legal requirement about well, almost 2 years ago now. So it was in December 2018. Since then, we haven't had any update from the government. What we have had in the interim is about 90 companies choosing to do that voluntarily anyway. And then there was a kind of a public call over the summer for the government to make that requirement mandatory. They've issued a statement saying they're going to give us all an update by the end of the year. Clearly right now they are quite busy, so not quite sure when it's going to happen or what it's going to look like, but that's the kind of the legislative background. But as I mentioned, we are seeing organizations, employers voluntarily go ahead and give that disclosure. It tends to be in certain sectors. So far it's been a lot of the law firms, the big accountancy firms, PwC and our competitors, a number of banks, and quite a lot of media organizations. But that is growing. And I guess if I were to say, well, what has changed over this year? This has been one of the starkest changes, is the amount of focus on ethnicity and specifically on collecting data on ethnicity and sharing that and being transparent about that. We did a survey with organizations about the time of the consultation, so about a year and a half to 2 years ago, asking them, do you have any data on ethnicity? Are you analyzing it? Are you thinking about reporting it? You know, where are you on this journey? And we reran that data, those questions over the summer, talked to about 100 organizations, from some of the biggest employers in the UK to some much smaller employers. And there is a complete change in attitudes to this. The number of companies who are pretty much ready to disclose has increased considerably, so from 3% to about 10%. But actually, most noticeably, even those who weren't quite ready, because this is quite complicated, are planning to disclose in the future. So when we last asked, about 8% of the companies we talked to were planning to disclose in the next few years. It's now 40% of companies are going to disclose in the next 3 years, and another 10% are about to do it. So we've gone from, you know, kind of 10% thinking about it to about 50% thinking about it, which in a year and a half is a complete turnaround. And what we're now seeing is a huge amount of effort put on that. And I'll give a little bit of detail, but I guess essentially that kind of comes down to a few different things happening. One, which you kind of talked about a little bit in your introduction, is a huge amount of pressure on employers from their current employees, but also the wider talent pool, who are asking for clarity on their attitude on diversity in general, but specifically in relation to ethnicity, wanting to see what their plan is, that they're focused on this topic. So that's really moved things along. And at the same time, as other companies do it, there's greater pressure coming as well from shareholders, for those who are listed, from customers, from clients. So some of you may have found that increasingly tender documents and other procurement requirements have increasing expectations around diversity. And originally that usually was gender, but increasingly we're seeing ethnicity coming in as well. So I guess a real context of lots of things happening, on top of which we have things like the Race at Work Charter, which Ornella referenced, and I'm sure we're about to hear more as well about the CBI change the race ratio. So those are both voluntary things organisations are signing up to with specific actions around race and ethnicity, and in both cases with one of their provisions being focused on collecting this data and reporting this data. So I suppose a bit of a context of lots and lots of things going on, a market where things are changing very rapidly at a time when, of course, the world is changing very rapidly, and there's probably never been quite so much focus on issues around employee well-being, talking to your employees, listening to your employees, and sharing your approach to looking after your people. So a really kind of fascinating environment in which everything is changing. I guess, having kind of said there's lots of reasons why everything should change, I should probably acknowledge that there are challenges in this space around collecting and using this data. I don't have time, and I'm sure I would bore you all to death if I talked about all of the technical challenges of that, but just to kind of acknowledge that around 30% of companies, I'm kind of almost not counting the very smallest companies, don't have any data on ethnicity. They could not tell you what the ethnicity of their staff is. And of course, if you can't do that, you can't possibly report anything at all or gain any insight from that data. Now, that's driven by legal issues, concerns about data protection, and systems practicalities. And I'm sure some of you have come across that kind of in your role helping clients and the challenges of getting and using that data. I guess all I would say, and this is in a UK context because globally it is considerably more complicated and very much depends on which country you are talking about. But the fact that a number of firms, including some large firms and some law firms, have disclosed here in the UK tells you that this is not an insurmountable issue. Providing that you follow the right processes, you document things correctly, and you consult correctly, you absolutely can collect data in this space. So it's really around getting ready to do that and getting the right processes in place. The real challenge actually comes for many with actually getting enough good quality data, because one of the issues that it runs across all types of diversity data, with the exception of gender and age, is that you cannot mandate that an employee or a candidate tells you this information. It's got to be given on a voluntary basis, and that means you're in quite a different situation of needing to convince people through a communication strategy to share this data. And that means a lot of really careful thinking about your messaging, so explaining what you want to do with this data, how you're going to protect and look after it, and what it's going to do for good, but also thinking about the right ways to embed those requests and those systems into standard processes, so you kind of nudge people into sharing that data. And actually, one of the best places to collect that data is as part of onboarding a new member of staff, because of course they're sharing lots of personal data anyway. It's just a great moment to collect that data, and probably the most successful. And if I look at PwC, we have great data. I think we've got about 96% of our staff have shared their data, which if you've ever tried to collect that, it's something we're really proud of. It's hard to do, but we're helped by the fact that, we have a very big graduate population, or kind of a new joiner population each year. And that means we have lots of new people coming in every year, and they tend to be willing to collect their data. It's much harder to get people who've been here for years to go into an HR system and give you their information. So that's perhaps a little bit of, you know, why everybody isn't doing it, despite all of these kind of swirling market pressures that I've talked about. PwC has chosen to disclose for a few years for two key reasons. One is about transparency, about showing, kind of as I talked about, that as a brand, as an employer, as a member of the community, we care about this issue. We're looking at it hard. We know we're not there, but we're willing to be open and to share where we are and to keep working on it. I guess the second part is that I think if I were to look at PwC's D&I strategy, it's very much rooted in data, in a kind of belief that you've got to understand where you are now, and what you're doing well and what you're doing not so well, if you're going to take the interventions and the actions that will really, really drive change. And that's why we have targets, and behind those bits of disclosure that you see is a huge amount of kind of detailed analytics. And we look at things like, we look at how people have moved around our organization over time, and we use projection analysis to say, well, if we've recruited and we've promoted and we've retained in this way for the last 5 years, if we keep behaving this way for another 5 years, what will we look like then? And actually, if we then start changing things, if we change the balance of diversity in our experienced hires, what will that do to us in another 5 years? If we're able to really drive down attrition amongst certain groups, what will that do to the data? And that helps us move from some information that we report to identifying the specific actions that will help us meet an ambition and a target. And I think I'm running out of time, so I guess I'll just end by saying that's what PwC does. I think that's kind of the overall message I'd want to go back to, which is reporting is great. It's a way of showing your commitment to the world, to potential candidates, to your staff, to your community and your customers. But actually, the real value is in having that data to make decisions, to make business decisions with. You know, we talked about the fact that we can see already the impact COVID-19 is having disproportionately on certain groups. We know, for example, the data is probably best around gender. We know, and there is increasing evidence that women are more likely to lose their jobs, to be placed on furlough, to work reduced hours during COVID-19, during indeed any recession. And you can't, and if you don't have the data, if you're not looking at that data before you make that decision about restructuring, you can't test if it's fair. So data is where to start.
I think that point about data, Katie, is a really good one. And you know, a lot of the discussion we always have is the move from compliance to action. And I think our experience with gender pay reporting has been that in wave one, for a percentage of firms, perhaps the 50% who aren't yet thinking about ethnicity, it was compliance. But of course, once the data exists, it fosters a conversation. I think lots of us, this certainly is my interpretation and what I've discussed with colleagues on the council at ACAS, is how do you start the conversation in businesses so that this is not something that we do just because we feel we have to, but because we want to make a change in the performance of the business. When you look at the group of client businesses you're talking to at PwC, and just picking up on Sean's question, what are the barriers that you see that are thrown up to taking some action in terms of getting ready and starting to prepare, and what are the tools that are used by allies to get around those?
So apologies, I can't see the question. Is that in general or specifically around collecting data?
So essentially, Sean's question was, what are some of the reasons given for businesses that are not taking action, not to take action? So right. The kind of barriers that are thrown up.
I mean, I think in general, you'd probably hard pressed to find certainly a large employer, a large brand who, if you said to them, do you think diversity and inclusion is important, would say no. I think that's quite unusual. I think the reality is what sometimes happens, that is that in a long list of priorities, it kind of filters a little bit down that list. And that's often because there might not be an immediate thing that needs to be reacted to. So often, you know, with business decisions, something's happening right now. we've got this data that customers need this, so we've got to change, whatever it might be. Whereas sometimes if you don't have a leadership or a leader who is saying this must be top of the agenda and let's set a deadline, then it can just kind of very gradually move down the agenda. And I think what we've seen in the last year is it being pushed up the agenda by events.
Well, I think that's certainly true. I mean, you mentioned the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's one of a string of events that have pushed it up the agenda. And I think that my conclusion from what I was saying at that time is it really exposes the difference between businesses who are prepared to talk the talk in this area and businesses who are prepared to walk the walk. And so much of that is about the right leadership. You recall Antonio Horta-Osorio at Lloyd's saying that Lloyd's didn't really start to make progress until he moved from telling his managers that D&I was important in their recruitment processes to throwing out their shortlists if they didn't demonstrate that in the day-to-day, which I think is a really nice point, Eugenia, to bring you in and talk about some of the CBI's work on the leadership side of all of this, and the new Change the Race ratio campaign, which builds on some work that the CBI's done over years in support of the previous change agenda on boardroom diversity on gender. So delighted to have you with us, and why don't you give us some insight into the agenda at the CBI?
Thank you, Neil. That was very that was very interesting and good to remember my interview with you over the phone. I was in New York and it was over FaceTime. So yeah, you can recruit people with those different ways of doing interviews. So yeah, I mean, I think what I was planning to do today actually was to share some of the figures of, from our employment trend survey. It's a survey that the CBI has been doing for 23 years now, and obviously we did change some of the questions this year to reflect on the pandemic and the impact that the pandemic has had on diversity and inclusion. So we know that the pandemic has accelerated changes in the way we work, from flexible working to digital skills, to prioritizing mental health and well-being, but also it has exacerbated existing structural inequalities in our society, from the burden of carrying responsibilities on women through to the disproportionate impact of the virus on ethnic minorities. And in previous economic downturns, diversity and inclusion efforts have stalled. But it's actually really interesting to see from our survey that we are seeing the opposite trend now, and more firms are increasing their focus on diversity and inclusion despite the crisis. So diversity and inclusion remains a priority for UK businesses. As we seek to build back better, people will be at the heart of the recovery agenda. And we think at the CBI that turning the crisis into an opportunity to build a more equal society, where diverse workforces and inclusive workplaces are the norm, must be a business priority. It's not only the right thing to do, but also will help businesses to recover quicker. There's a lot of evidence. The business case is very clear, it's watertight, and I think businesses know that diversity and inclusion will be very important in the recovery agenda for them. So because of the pandemic, we did include a question in our survey, exactly, asking that, and to better understand how the pandemic is and has impacted the diversity and inclusion agenda. And it's actually interesting to see that nearly 4 in 10 firms have increased their focus on diversity and inclusion over the 12 months, while the rest of the companies reported no change. And this doesn't mean a bad thing. No change doesn't mean less focus on D&I. And it's interesting to see when looking at different protected characteristics and how companies' approach to them have changed over the last 12 months. We see that about a third of businesses respondents have increased their approach to race, while 3 in 10 have done so for gender. it's not a surprise to see that larger firms are more able to increase their focus on diversity and inclusion than smaller ones due to resources, with 62% of larger companies saying that they have increased their focus on diversity and inclusion over the past 12 months. And I think, we have a really interesting question in our survey this year to actually reflect on, BAME colleagues' experiences in the workplace and how businesses are reacting to the killing of George Floyd and the global Black Lives Matter movement. And it's actually quite interesting to see that the majority of companies are taking different steps to support the experiences of BAME colleagues in the workplace. So we see that 17% of companies, because of this, have started internal processes to assess how they recruit, retain, and progress BAME staff, while 14% of companies organized internal activities to raise awareness of the experiences of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic colleagues inside and outside the workplace. I could share all this information with you later. There's a lot of questions, a lot of numbers, and we did a breakdown by sector, by size. But I guess it was really important for us, and the CBI has played an important role. And we organize
We've lost you, Eugenia. Eugenia, if you could just...
there in the campaign. Yes.
So we lost you for a little bit there, so you might want to, can I suggest you flick your camera off and go back maybe 20 seconds, just so your signal was interrupted. So if you just, if we focus on the audio, and just jump back about 20 seconds in what you were saying, and we'll be able to pick up from there.
Yes, sorry, can you hear me now? I'm having some issues as well with the internet.
Yes, we can hear you now. So if you want to pick up from where you were, and hopefully the audio only will help.
Hello. Yes, sorry. Yeah, I'm having some issues with my internet. Let me turn off internet in devices as well, because that might be the reason. So what I was saying is that because of our work on diversity and inclusion has been a priority obviously before the pandemic, but actually the killing of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement has actually sort of accelerated our work on this issue. And we deliver a couple of webinars to discuss race and equality in the workplace, but actually developed the campaign Change the Race Ratio, led by the CBI, by our president, Lord Billy Moria. But it is a collective campaign alongside other businesses. So we have four main commitments in the campaign. The first one is to increase racial and ethnic diversity among board members. So there's lack representation of BAME colleagues at board level. So this target follows the Parker Review targets, and we want to achieve at least one racially diverse board member by the end of 2021 at FTSE 100, and at least one racially diverse board member by 2024 in FTSE 250. Then the other commitment is to disclose ethnicity pay gap by 2022 at the latest. The importance of being transparent on targets and actions, and the CBI has been very supportive and has been pushing for ethnicity pay gap reporting to be mandatory. So that's one of the other commitments of the campaign for those that sign up to the campaign. And then one of the other commitments is to establish a separate target for Black participation at both levels, so EXCO and EXCO -1. And then obviously to create an inclusive culture in which talent from all diversities can thrive at the workplace. So that's the campaign we launched a month ago, and we're doing the Diversity and Inclusion Conference at the end of November, and we're going to be sort of reflecting on the campaign a bit more. You know, I'm getting emails pretty much every day from different members that want to join. And again, we're focusing on FTSE 100 and FTSE 250, but actually we're asking all businesses to join the campaign and be accountable for these targets. So yeah, it is a priority. And back to what my first point, you know, businesses know that this topic will be very important. And it's very important. And it will be crucial for them to recover quicker from this crisis, and will be a priority for our policy work in 2021, but also for our members. So very happy to take questions on this, because yeah, there's a lot of information there, but I'm conscious there are other speakers.
Jenny, a really interesting insight, and I think the CBI's leadership on this is really interesting. If I think back to 15 years ago at the time of the Davis Review, you know, mandatory reporting was something that it took the CBI a long time to come around to, and the kind of much more leaned in approach that you and colleagues are taking on this is really heartening. In terms of, you know, we know from the work of the Parker Review that there is a diverse potential leadership group out there for businesses, and it's about getting it prioritized. I'm going to ask you one question and remind people, if you do have questions for the panelists, just pop them into the chat box. I'll ask you one question, which actually is a reflection on something one of Katie's colleagues, Tunji Akintakun, said to me about kind of how you drive change. And to what extent in the CBI's thinking has the fact that we need to do this as a whole organization come through? I mean, Tunji's reflection to me was that there's almost a kind of an inclusion burden which falls on senior Black and minority ethnic staff who are looked to drive this, when of course it's actually a whole business issue. Is that something that stands behind the positioning that the CBI is taking on this?
Yeah, I mean, you know, this we have been saying that the role of business leaders is crucial, actually, you know, and I think, I suppose, you know, if I reflect on the CBI as an organization, as a workplace, actually, I think the work of our BAME network has been crucial. And we had a lot of meetings, you know, I'm part of that network, and we had a lot of meetings with EXCO, trying, you know, really kind of reflecting on our own experiences, sharing our life experiences with them, and really kind of, yeah, I suppose when you listen to our now former DG Caroline Fairburn, she would say, like, it was very important for me to listen to BAME colleagues, and I know there's a lot of, and actually I had a meeting this morning. To BAME or not to BAME was the title of the meeting, because we are actually sort of thinking about this, you know, this terminology, and I think it's, in terms of reporting, is a good one, but actually when it comes to personal experiences, is you know, it's an easy kind of, people were saying this morning, it's like a lazy way of kind of talking about different things, really. And for me, I don't know, I don't have a category in the census, for instance. I mean, I'm Latin American, there's no category for me at all, you know. You know what I mean? So, but I think in terms of your, you know, back to your question, I think it was about sharing experiences, and EXCO in our case, kind of listening to ourselves and really trying to understand how our experiences were different to them, and I guess from the survey we get that as well. You know, the importance of networks to shape, you know, the organizational sort of culture kind of thing. So I think, you know, it's crucial, as Caroline said, and our new DG has said as well last week in his first appearance in CBI's annual conference, D&I is crucial, but we have to do more. Progress has been slow. We have to do more, and we have to be more accountable of this. And that's, for example, why we're asking the government to resume gender pay gap reporting. It was important to pause that because businesses were and are really, I suppose, with this national lockdown again, trying to navigate the crisis, trying to survive Brexit in looming. We're asking businesses to report on gender again. We have to do more. We have to be accountable, and there's a key role for businesses to kind of progress in this agenda.
Thank you. That's a really good insight, and I think the leadership that things like change the race ratio has given the business community, I think, is hugely valuable. And leadership has always been a particular driver of progress, and getting into the walking the walk, not just talking the talk, as I said earlier. Now, reflecting back on kind of introductions at the top of the call, I think as I said then, anyone who looks at the labour market data published today knows that young people are a particular area of concern in terms of supporting people, and young people who come from less included backgrounds are also more likely to be at risk of long-term scarring effects of unemployment in a downturn such as we're experiencing, which makes, I think, Sam, the work of Movement to Work all the more important as we go into this period. So delighted to have you with us. Do you want to say a few words just to introduce Movement to Work and a little bit about how you're reacting to this?
Thanks, Neil, and thanks for having me today, everyone. I was actually going to start off with a little transition from that conversation we've been having there that's all about diversity and inclusion, with a bit of a focus on gender, but a real focus on BAME, which has really come to the forefront of so many organisations' thinking this year. But if we're going to, thinking about the audience who we've got here today, if we're going to recruit differently, then we need to be looking in different places. And if we're going to look in different places for our future talent, we also need to really challenge ourselves about the roles that we're recruiting to, and also the experiences that we're looking for in these roles, and the capabilities that we're looking for in these roles. Within our own steering group at Movement to Work at the moment, we're having this conversation. The power of Movement to Work is it's a collaboration across the business community and government to create fantastic work experiences for those young people furthest from the workplace, to transition them into long-term employment or education. Now, the power of the movement comes from, in many senses, when it was first set up, the fact that we have a steering group, as many other charity chief execs say to me, Sam, you've got a steering group to die for. You've got FTSE 100 CEOs driving your organisation. This is a real diversity challenge for me, because our organisation is all about diversity. But if I just recruit FTSE 100 CEOs, it doesn't take much to imagine what my steering group looks like, does it? It is not diverse, and that is a huge challenge for us. And so that's where I come back to when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, we've got to think of the types of roles and the experience that we're looking for, as much as thinking about whether or not it's blind recruitment or targeting in different areas. I'm somebody who comes to the workplace with dyslexia. I refuse to accept that this is any sort of disability. In my daughter's words, she also has it. It's her superpower. I love that. How have I succeeded in the workplace? I succeed because I do jobs that I'm good at. I do jobs that play to my advantage. But I also have been really, really fortunate to grow up in an environment where that was really encouraged. And so many young people are not in that space at all. So Movement to Work, we target people who are typically furthest from the marketplace, often workplace, often due to very personal circumstances. They're perhaps young carers, care leavers, perhaps living with a disability. They may be a young refugee. They may be ex-offenders. And at Movement to Work, our aim is to educate, and I use the word educate very deliberately, employers on why giving these young people a chance as a career is an incredible opportunity, not just for the young person, but also for the organisation that facilitates the experience. What we see with businesses is they enter this space thinking that this is about corporate social responsibility. Youth employment programs, and I know BT won't mind me sharing, when they first started, BT felt that their youth employment program should sit under their CSR team. It was a great thing to put in the annual report to shareholders, and it gave staff an opportunity to do volunteering and to feel good about themselves. They very quickly realised that those were almost the byproducts. The real value of youth employment programs was a way of creating a diverse talent pool of young people who would move on into their apprenticeships programs and then progress up through the organisation. That was where the real business case for the programs were. So it would be remiss of me not to mention that it's Learning Disability Week, which MenCap are leading this year. And the reason that I mention it is I love the hashtag they're using this year. It's Think Differently, back to what I was first talking about. And now they're talking about it in the concept of Think Differently about people with learning disabilities and how you support them in the workplace. I would say we need to think differently about anyone with protected characteristics. We need to think differently in the way we're recruiting in a much broader perspective. So we were established, Movement to Work, in 2013, collaboration, as I say, across business and government. We're a pretty vibrant, not-for-profit collaboration these days of employers, youth outreach organisations and training providers, and really focused on 18 to 30-year-olds who are facing huge barriers to work. And you know, at the moment, that's an enormous cohort, and it would be quite easy for businesses and organisations like Movement to Work to focus more on those young people who have left university and are grappling with where their first job should be, thinking about the milk round and how's that going to work. That's not where our space is. We believe that those young people, they will have a tough time for the next 6 months, but as the economy bounces back, the economy will support them. We're staying very focused on those much harder to reach young people. So a robust delivery partner, we now deliver 1,500 work placements every month. It has reduced during COVID-19, of course it has, but we're really proud of just how many businesses have switched their programs to an online offering during this period. That has created a whole different bunch of barriers. Of course it has, but can it be done? Of course it can be done. As I was mentioning, it's not just for social mobility and driving diversity and inclusion within your organisation. Many of our members actually start to report savings through recruitment through our programmes rather than their traditional routes. And we know that mentoring of young people can be enormously rewarding for existing staff. So we're now in a place of having hundreds of organisations, far too long list to mention, but I think there's a presentation that'll be coming round afterwards. This has all been made possible through employers, charities and government working together. Collectively, we've provided young people with diverse and empowering experiences. Quality is key to this. A poor work experience is worse than a young person not having a work experience at all. You can really push them much, much further from the workplace. So we very much advocate that organisations, when they're thinking about work experience, think about bringing in a third-party provider who can provide them more pastoral support around a young person. You can't expect mentors and line managers in an organisation to be able to support a young person thinking about how they're going to deal with their housing crisis, how they're dealing with their universal credit or their mental health. You do need some professional support along there. So let's talk a bit about how COVID-19, as we're in the midst of our second national lockdown, how is it affecting young people? Well, you'll have seen today, the UK is facing its highest level of youth employment in 4 decades. And people between the ages of 16 and 25 are now twice as likely than older workers to have lost their jobs. 1 in 5 young people during the lockdown, and more than 1 in 5 BAME staff have lost their jobs altogether. And what's really frightening behind these statistics, when I began this role in February, we were already in a place where if you came from a lower socioeconomic background, you are half as likely to find yourself in full-time employment by the age of 24 as another candidate with exactly the same educational qualifications as you. Social mobility is a real factor in our diversity and inclusion space. COVID-19 has severely affected the job market and the traditional career trajectory, leaving many young people who otherwise would have thought regular 9-to-5 jobs to consider unstable and the far less reliable gig economy. We're now in a space where we've got clear evidence that prolonged spells of unemployment, particularly while young, can cause long-lasting scars on the individual's future earnings, employment perspectives, and health and well-being. This is also likely to feed into, as we've seen today, a rise in mental health, disenfranchised youth, making them more likely to turn to lifestyles of crime. Now more than ever, we need young people with the support to thrive at work and acknowledge their vital role in our road to recovery. In direct response to this particularly challenging year, at Movement to Work, we've been launching 3 initiatives to ensure that we can all emerge stronger following the challenges posed by COVID-19. They're about putting young people first, a real call to action to businesses, be accessible, go digital, and support and empower. In short, whether or not it's already furloughed workers, young people on development and training programs, or potential new hirees, at Movement to Work, we encourage all organisations to prioritise young people as part of their ongoing recruitment strategy. And secondly, we'd urge you and all the organisations you work with to find creative ways to continue training and development and working experience for young people online. We have a whole host of advice and best practice on how to make that transition, including sharing tools that are already out there and initiatives that support accessibility. Finally, we have got to help young people recover from this trauma by boosting their confidence, providing meaningful support and ensuring their safety. We're increasingly concerned about how to make sure young people working from home are starting their careers, are properly supported and ensure they have positive experiences. So with all of you virtually in front of me, what's my ask? How can you possibly help youth employment? Well, it's the start of a conversation. It's about, are your organisations empowering organisations that allow people to be the best of themselves? If we can support and help you with that, please come and talk to us. We offer free of charge advice. We work alongside organisations creating bespoke answers for how youth in employment can support you and your future talent. So that's it from me, but really looking forward to our discussion and working with the REC and its members to help diverse youth employment across all our sectors moving forward.
Thanks, Sam. That's really interesting. And Movement to Work as an organisation is coming off a long way. It also wins a prize as one of the only organisations that I've been to an actual live real event with in 2020, because you managed to squeeze your big event into just in time as the gate was closing back in, I think it was February, wasn't it?
February. Yes, it was.
There's an awful lot there, and I think the position of young people in our labour market is really important, and particularly pull out that thing you said right at the top of your remarks about if you want to do something different, you have to look somewhere different. And I think for lots of client businesses, as we've heard from Katie, that's very much on the agenda. Now we have just a couple of minutes left, so if there are any pressing questions, pop them in the chat box now. But Julia's asked Onella what I think is a really good question to lead us towards the close of the session, which is, you know, as recruiters, what are our top priorities when it comes to making some progress on this? What's your reflections on what you've heard in this hour, and some of the things you might point to for recruitment businesses as they go away from this edition of the forum?
Well, I think one of the key takeaways from this session for me has been that, there are certain triggers which alert companies to look at their diversity and inclusion plans and what they're doing and what their offering is. And often these triggers will relate to one protected characteristic. So as we've all mentioned, during the summer with the re-emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of organizations were looking within themselves and seeing, okay, what are we doing on ethnic minorities? Are we supporting progression? What's our take up like? And similarly, now that there's a spike in youth unemployment and there's more young people than ever who are going to be out of work and out of leaving university in a labour market which wasn't as strong as it was at the top of the year, there's also been that focus on young people and what are we having to do to make sure that they don't suffer any long-term scarring on their career prospects in the future. And I think as recruiters, we have a really important role to play in terms of keeping the discussion on diversity and inclusion holistic. Because it's very tempting to kind of champion causes as and when they come, but really and truly within the protected characteristics, as you mentioned, Sam, you work with young people who are furthest from the labour market. So although they are in the bracket of young people, they may also be carers. They may also have disabilities, and that's I think as recruiters, the job of a recruiter is really to enforce that message to clients, to look at the individual and to take a more holistic approach to diversity and inclusion. Because otherwise we'll get to a point where it becomes a bit of a oppression Olympics, which I find sometimes when on a round table with, say, dealing with 50 plus workers and saying, oh, we also need provision just as young people, and it's BME, and it's like, oh, but actually we're already doing gendered pay reporting. Do we also have to do ethnicity pay reporting? And it becomes a bit of a oppression Olympics as to get to the top of which one is the most pressing. But I think that's really the key job of the recruiters, is to keep diversity and inclusion at the forefront and keep it as a holistic approach. So it's not jumping on trends, but ensuring that we have diverse and we have inclusive and diverse practices that will ensure that different people across the protected characteristics are having a fair entry into the labour market and able to progress. So I think that is the #1 job of the recruitment industry, Julia, is to keep all diversity and inclusion holistic and ensure that we're looking at individuals rather than labels.
That's super insight, Ornella. And I think from my perspective, what you've heard from Katie already on this session is that this is now on the menu of things that clients are going to be looking for. So there is, as well as being the right things to do, there's enlightened self-interest, being able to do exactly what Sam says, which is to be able to look in different places and to bring different solutions without going too far down the rabbit hole of a single form of diversity or inclusion. And that feels to me like a classic professional services business space, which we as recruiters should be in, and potentially, if we get it right, it will deepen client relationships, especially at a time when we know that talent acquisition teams and HR teams are frankly a bit lost. Because the businesses that they are serving are changing around them, driven by economic demands, and that clash of the urgent change with the important need to stay inclusive, I think, is an area where client businesses are really struggling. And if we as recruiters can develop some answers to that, I reflect on the discussions we've had with HR directors of client firms on the REC podcast over the last few months, where they've talked about, what I really want is a recruitment firm that can talk me through how I'm going to do this and then help me do it. And that sense of having a toolkit to do this is really important. And Ornella, I know you've published some work for us before on the things that recruiters can do. We talked earlier on, you talked earlier about the changes that in advice that we put around the code. And through next year, I think you can expect the REC to be doing more of that. So thanks, Julia, for the question. I think it's a great place to draw us together, and I've begged a little more of your time than we originally set out, but I think it was worth just drawing things together like that. So thank you, Ornella, for setting all this up with Karen and our REC colleagues. In particular, thanks to Katie, Sam, and Jenny for joining us on the session today. As ever, if you have any feedback, just get in touch directly with myself or with Ornella. Future topics that you'd like to cover in the forum, but also any ideas or questions that come to mind for what the REC should be doing and should be aware of. As always, we're keen to hear from you as a members organisation. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks again to our panelists, and I'll see you all soon, hopefully.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.